Hello, hi there, my darling humanoids, androids, reptiloids, asteroids, whatever way you like to identify yourself as. So, as I've promised in my last video, this is going to be the first initiation, you could say, into a yoga practice for you guys. So, as I've stated, I will start by explaining to you and demonstrating to you some basic things from Hatha Yoga in particular. Whereas, once again, Hatha Yoga is focused on balancing out your sun and moon channels of the body. Or essentially, if you want to put it in simpler terms, it is the very middle path kind of yoga from all of the rest of the available practices. So, once again, by focusing on the safety first and foremost of the yoga practice, I'm hoping to get you guys engaged into practicing yoga as a whole, as well as ensure that whatever practicing route you end up going down, you don't damage yourself or harm yourself in any way, and that your yoga experience as a whole can be truly enjoyable. So the topic for today's video in particular are some general principles in the basic asana practices as well as human anatomy. So you should be aware, at least a little bit, of the basic structure of the human body. It is even taught in schools that first of all, we have our bone structure. So our legs, our arms, our spine, everything else. It doesn't move on its own. That is where we need muscles. And so to move parts of our body, our muscles either contract or extend, and it is all tied up to our nervous system, so on and so forth. But in Hatha Yoga, at least for the basic part, all you need to focus on is the muscle and the joint and bone structure. And when we talk about our joints, so that implies our ankles, our wrists, our elbows, joints in our neck, all of these things are created to perform a particular function. So whereas things like our wrists and ankles are meant to rotate a full way round, things such as our elbows or knees have a more limited capacity where we can kind of rotate them, but to a limited extent. For the most part, they just bend. And so the goal of yoga is essentially to achieve the maximum capacity and mobility of those structures such as joints, muscles, and your bones in a peaceful and balanced way that doesn't break apart your body, which I've also mentioned in the last video. And so to even just demonstrate to you guys the importance of safety in yoga and the importance of all of these small details, I offer to you guys to try a very, very basic thing. Sit down like this. Sit down on your shins. And so have you sat down? If you sat down, now notice, how did you sit down? So as you can see, everything is technically fine right now. The heels are joined together. But when a person sits down, what usually happens is, boom, the person ends up sitting in between their heels, right? Whereas instead, the correct way would be to have the heels joined together, feet joined together, and sitting on top of the heels with the knees. If you pay attention to what happens when the heels are unjoined, is that your knees end up being turned over. So you end up getting an overextension of the external knee muscles and a contraction on the inside of your knee muscles, which in the future can really damage the joints and can end up causing long-term impact on the knee joint. And now another very key aspect, just to start off with the basics of joint safety in yoga, are the wrists. So let's say from that same position with the heels joined together, you sit down and you bend forward, right? In general, it is a very common mistake that people, when they do hand positioning, when they put the weights on their hands, they keep fingers together and either the elbows are falling apart or falling in, as some people have it. And that obviously also impacts the further development of your body, because although technically humans stop growing after the age of around 23, there is still ways that our bodies get modified over time with us continuing to do repetitive actions. So if over the span of your lifetime, you keep rotating your body parts in incorrect ways, your body will still be taking shape and form in an incorrect manner, which then leads to health issues down the line, including protrusions, just general pain. So the correct way for any kind of hand placement in yoga and in general any type of workout or exercise routine is fingers spread wide apart so that you can cover the maximum surface area to rely on with your weight. And if at any point you are extending your arms, the elbows should be straight and absolutely parallel to your shoulders. So again, bending down, you want to look at your hands, ensure that the fingers are spread wide apart and that the arms are perfectly straight. And only then you will notice that you can actually push against your hands to drive your back further backward, therefore actually properly stretching the lateral lines of your body as well as your backside. Because if everything is bent down, you can't properly push down, therefore nothing down there gets stretched, which absolutely misses the whole point of the stretch, as an example. And then if from that position you go, let's say, into a plank, again, fingers spread wide apart, absolutely parallel, elbows and shoulders. And then when you straighten your body, you cannot do this, you cannot do that, because that leads to bends in your back, which impacts, first of all, your core muscles and their stability, as well as your shoulder muscles, your back muscles, and in general, your whole body, even down to your knee positioning, which impacts the way that you walk, the way that you sit, everything. So in yoga, one of the key factors is to always keep everything absolutely straight and linear. So next, let's talk about balance. Excusez-moi, I had to change from the very hot trousers I had on, but in regards to balance, if you stand up, when you're standing up, how many balance points do you feel like you need to keep in balance? In general, it is considered that humans need 3 key balance points, and that is enough for stability in pretty much any position. So on our foot, we're bipedal mammals, we have 3 key balancing points. 1, 2, 3. So when it comes to any standing positions, usually 1 foot on the ground is more than enough to keep yourself balanced in any way, because you have the 3 balancing points. Turn it into 2. Let's say, for example, you have one of those feet that has a tendency to fall to one side. Then you only have 2 points of balance, which makes it awfully difficult and makes you fall. So another key thing to get right when you're starting off your practice is ensure that you actually have good enough stability in even such basic things as your feet. And then when it comes to more difficult positions where you're engaging your hands, for example, such as down dog, we pretty much have 4 balance points if we include both of our legs. However, we can have a one-legged down dog where it goes down to only 3 key balance points, once again, including 1 arm, 2 arm, and leg. And of course, there are certain exercises in yoga where you reduce the number of balance points to 2 or even just 1, but even if you're just balancing on one hand or one leg, that still ends up having 3 key balance points. So essentially, if you tend to struggle in yoga to keep balance, one of the most helpful tips I have is to always keep in mind that you have 3 balance points at all times. And if you're really struggling to balance, first of all, look at a point in space that is not moving, that is stable, because that way you synchronize with that point in space and become stable yourself. And second of all, keep in mind those 3 points. So always imagine the 3 points that you're relying on to keep your balance. And when you keep these 3 points in mind, it is automatically going to balance you as well. Okay, and now let's do a bit about the correlation of our body parts and their interdependence. So if you have a yoga block or even just a book, preferably a very, very thick book, I suggest that you do this little exercise as well. So if you stand up, right? Once again, legs relatively together, maybe a bit apart. Put the yoga block in between your thighs, right? So what you can notice is that, first of all, in order to keep the block in place, especially if you put your feet even further apart, you need to really engage the muscles above your knees. And now, try to bring the block backwards by turning your leg muscles outwards. And then bring it back forward by turning your leg muscles outwards and bringing your hips further forward. So you can do a movement to bring the block back and forward. And you can notice that when you do that, the rest of the muscles and the rest of your joints change position as well. So when you bring it forwards, let's say you typically have to engage your core, engage your glutes as well. Whereas when you bring it backwards, once again, if I turn around, you can see that straight away there's a bend in my back that's created when I bring the block back, as well as my knees end up falling inwards and the calves end up extending outwards, which in yoga, especially if you're trying to stay balanced and keep your body safe, is not the best option. And unfortunately, it's a very big tendency because, especially with girls, we like to look thick, we like to look good, we want that curved back. But the thing is, this kind of positioning is extremely unhealthy because it turns your hips forwards, which in turn means that you will be slouching to compensate for the turn in your back with your upper back. Once again, which leads to obvious things like the crooked back. I don't know how to call it properly in English, but the old people who just walk like this. Do you want to be that person? I don't think so. So what we do, instead of standing like this, we engage our core, turn our leg muscles outwards in order to keep the legs nice, straight, core engaged, and back safe, first and foremost. If you feel like your knees are extending too much on the sides, on the inside, that means danger, and stop doing whatever you're doing and do it correctly. And chances are, if you're experiencing some kind of pain, that means that your core or a particular group of muscles is under-engaged, or you're not keeping in mind some of the basic rules, such as heels together, fingers spread far apart, elbows straight, parallel to your shoulders, so on and so forth. Everything straight, symmetrical. Because the point of yoga is, once again, balance, symmetry, and essentially, the more beautiful you look when you do yoga, the better you're doing yoga. Pretty much is what it comes down to, because as humans, we find beauty in anything that is symmetrical, balanced. Therefore, it is really helpful to also do yoga in a mirror, because then you can really see if you're keeping your body symmetry. And if you're keeping your body symmetry right, if you're not letting any parts of your body fall apart and become asymmetrical, you're going to be pretty safe. So through talking about balance and the interconnectedness of all of our body parts, we just made a smooth transition from the lower body to the upper body. So once again, if you place your hands on your hips and just notice how the way that you turn your hips affects the rest of your body positioning. You can notice and start paying attention to the fact that as humans, we essentially have two curves backwards in our back, in our spine, and two curves forwards. So we have one curve that goes inwards, which is our neck. Then we have a curve that goes backwards in our upper back. Then another curve inwards, which is the lordosis, the lower back. And then we have a little small curve that goes forwards again, which is this bit. So essentially, another key point of yoga is instead of allowing us to stay stuck like this with all of these curves in different places, misshapen and misplaced, so that then when we're old people while walking around like this, is to instead straighten our body and tune it into becoming perfectly symmetrical, not just from the forwards point of view, but from the side as well. And if we get into a bit of an esoteric part, the reason why it actually works this way, especially in terms of strengthening your core, why it affects the rest of your body so positively, is because if you essentially take your belly button and place 2 or 3 fingers above it, that point is essentially the energy center of your whole body. In such things as Qigong or any kind of martial art, they talk about it as well. But in Sanskrit, essentially this point is called the khanda, which is once again the energy center, and is also called essentially the gate to the rest of the chakras and the rest of the energetic centers around your body. So what you're doing by engaging your core, at least in the yoga theory, is that by strengthening this part of yourself surrounding the khanda, is you're strengthening everything else, the rest of your chakras, the rest of your aura, the rest of your energetic centers, whatever way you like to call it. But since we are already touching on the topic of chakras, another helpful thing that you can do to decrease the lordosis in your neck and straighten the kyphosis in your upper back, it is very helpful to get right up to a wall and attempt to straighten your body against it. So when you're trying to really lean back on the wall with your spine, really straighten it across the wall with your heels touching the wall, what you will notice start to happen is that involuntarily your chin ends up falling down, because once again we have a natural lordosis in the back of our neck. And so what happens when you get this movement of your chin down is you get a Jalandhara Baddha, which is an energy lock in your Vishuddha chakra, which is your voice chakra, otherwise known as the throat chakra, which also activates it, empowers your voice, empowers your breathing, and helps you concentrate and take control of the way that you operate in this world. But once again, esoterics are going to be a separate video. This is just, for us, it's only important in regards to the way that it increases the oxygenation of your body. So through purposeful constriction of this part of your body, you are becoming more aware of the way that the air enters your system. And through increasing that awareness in a controlled state, you also become more aware of it in a relaxed and normal state of being. So now that we have all of these extremely basic concepts down, after so long, I know, we can talk about the very, very basic Surya Namaskar Yoga Asana, which is also known as the sun salutation. And why do we start with this? Is because unfortunately, the modern human being, due to all of the sitting down, being on the phone, everything like that, in comparison to our predecessors, is extremely ill and constantly in pain, where you can notice that even 20-year-old girls and boys nowadays complain that, oh, I have so much back pain, oh, I have so much knee pain, etc., etc. Everything is clicking, everything is tight. So before you do anything else in yoga, please ensure that you can do just the simple sun salutation properly first and foremost. So the sun salutation, even starting with just raising your arms, once again, everything perpendicular, everything perfectly straight, core engaged. If everything ends up being bent, if you can't raise your arms properly, if your hips end up bending forwards, no, we need to straighten it all out, pull yourself into a string. And only in this case, if you're able to do that, you can carry on. So essentially, yoga is a way to test yourself every step of the way, what your capacity is. And if you're encountering difficulties at any positioning or movement before proceeding, you need to breathe through it. So let's say, once again, I'm doing sun salutation and everything is bent back. So I breathe out, engage my core more, straighten out more. Breathe out again, engage my core even more, straighten out even more. And so slowly, by just breathing through it, I can actually get myself to be properly straight, right? The next aspect of the sun salutation is the bending forward. So once again, modern human, loves sitting like this. So a common mistake that people end up making when they start bending forwards and doing all of the bends in yoga is that they go for it with a bent back. So once again, not protecting the lordosis in the lower back, not protecting the shins and the backside of your legs, not protecting the hamstrings, just going for it is extremely damaging to the body. So after you have kind of mastered, you don't have to master it, but at least become aware and have somewhat control of straightening your body out when standing up, you can start bending down by, once again, keeping control of your core to keep the lordosis and the lower back safe, ensuring that your upper back is straight as well. And through turning of your hips purely, you start bending downwards. So once again, it is very helpful when you're starting out to keep your hands on your hips and start bending with your hips. And by rotating your hips, not bending your back, purely rotating your hips more and more while keeping your back straight, do you start bending downwards. So hi down there, it's me again. So now that we have bent down at least a certain amount, let's say to this level, sorry, I had to put the camera down to continue doing this and demonstrating this. A problem that often occurs before a person can continue bending down is that when a person reaches a certain level, like for example, can barely touch the ground, they realize that the back of their legs hurts. So that is where you kind of need to become more kind to yourself. And if you notice that without bending your back or bending your knees, you can't bend any further, once again, breathe through it and do let yourself bend your knees in order to keep the back straight while still slightly lengthening your hamstrings. Because essentially, if your legs don't allow you to keep them straight when bent down, that just means that the muscles in the back of your thighs are very, very constricted. And so forcing them to remain open can damage them. So be kind to yourself. And when you're just starting out the yoga practice, keep your knees slightly bent. Try to straighten them as much as possible, but if you can't do it with fully straight legs, that is perfectly fine. And just carry on breathing through the position until you can bring yourself closer and closer to your legs. And then when your chest is actually touching your knees, touching your legs, you can kind of bend your back a little bit to bring yourself even further to your legs. And at this point, you can start to straighten your legs when you are already having your upper body touch your lower body. But if, let's say, you don't have a problem with your knees, then fully just carry on rotating your hip flexors until you can reach the floor. And then preferably keep your hands on the floor so that your upper back stays straight throughout the movement. Okay, and now we ended up getting back to our lower body. So let's talk about hamstrings and hamstring flexibility. So for this, to increase your hamstring flexibility, especially if you struggle to reach the floor or reach your feet in any of the positions, I would recommend getting a proper belt, or to be fair, any belt can do. I just have a piece of fabric here, for example. So really anything that is long enough for your particular use case. Once again, preferable to get a proper yoga belt, but if you cannot, literally even a scarf will do. So a really good exercise is to lay down on the ground. Once again, ensure there's no lordosis, that there's no gaps in between your back, your spine, and the floor. So press your body downwards. Shoulders bend back as well, so bringing your shoulder blades together so that your body is once again perfectly aligned, everything is straightened out. And then you raise one of your legs. If you struggle to straighten out your legs and keep them straight in this position, you can take a belt or the scarf and use that to then reach your back to the floor again, straighten it out, ensure that your shoulders are bent down, and only then start stretching your foot back. And this is a really simple stretch that will get your hamstrings warmed up and nice and flexible once again. And then as you progress, you can reach more and more towards your foot until eventually you can actually grab the foot and start bending it to yourself with your own hands. If at this point you have a need to bend your knees, you can do that, but this is a different asana altogether at this point, which works more on the upper part of your hamstrings and your glutes. So if you really want to get the full back side of your leg, you need to keep your knees straight and bend this way. So now that we went over some of the basic stretches and mobility key points in yoga, let's talk about the very cool parts of yoga. I keep telling you about all of these cool parts, but really everything in this video is a core part of yoga. So this is just another one, which is breath. So once again, going back to human anatomy, we have our rib cage, we have the outer muscles of our rib cage, the inner muscles of our rib cage, and the diaphragm. When we breathe in, our diaphragm increases, our outer rib cage muscles pull the rib cage apart. And then when we breathe out, the diaphragm decreases and the inner muscles of our rib cage pulls the ribs back together. So if you just try this exercise of just breathing a bit more intensely than usual, you can start to become aware of the way that your rib cage moves, and you can also pay attention and notice to where your rib cage expands and decreases. When you actually dive deeper into yoga, there's different breathing methodologies where you can have the front expanding breath, where you're expanding your chest and opening the front side of your rib cage more. You can have the back breathing, where you're breathing more into your back, as the name calls for, where you're expanding the back side of your rib cage. You can have the side breath, where you're breathing into the sides of your lungs, into the sides of your rib cage. And you can have the belly breath, where you're really expanding the diaphragm. So I would recommend that you just try to experiment with this and really pay attention to how you breathe normally, just in your regular breathing. So how much breath do you actually allow to enter your body, and which parts of your rib cage and lungs actually open up and increase when you breathe. Because as a normal human being, what you can actually start to notice is that you have very shallow breaths, because all that you're engaging is your upper side of the rib cage. And you just breathe this way. Whereas in order to get proper oxygenation in your body and also help you reduce anxiety, along with all of the other benefits, as well as strengthening your core, everything like that, you actually want to try to engage more of your rib cage and start breathing more fully with your full lung system. So now, if you just try this exercise with me, let's do some box breathing, which is a very basic breathing exercise, where we inhale for 4 counts, hold it in for a few seconds, and exhale for 4 counts, to really try to bring our awareness into the ways that we breathe and the parts of our body that we breathe into. So now with me, just breathe in on 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold the breath for 1, 2, 3, 4. and exhale for 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold your breath again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold your breath. 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Did you notice the way that your ribs have been shifting throughout this exercise? I hope you did. If you haven't managed to, try to do this in your own time. And another very helpful practice that is at the heart of yoga is the hatha breath, which is when you constrict, once again, the throat chakra. So bring your chin closer to your chest. And through constricting your throat, you can hear this kind of whispering breathing sound, which once again just amps up your awareness of how much and how long you breathe for. And you do the same with breathing out. So you breathe in, and as you're breathing, you once again can notice how much more your chest inflates and deflates while you're doing the breathing practice. So it is helpful to do the breathing practice for at least a minute. You can start with doing them for a minute before each yoga practice, or after, preferably before and after each yoga practice, and then expand the time that you do the various breathing exercises for. So you can expand from 1 minute to 3 minutes, then to 5 minutes, and so on, until you actually make it part of your meditation routine, where you do the same hatha breath, although it's not recommended at the starting levels because it can make you feel dizzy, or just the box breath, or once again the sun and moon channel evening breath through the different nostrils. So what I just did on that is block one nostril, breathe in through the other, hold the breath in, switch nostrils, breathe out through the other nostril. Hold the breath, breathe in through the same nostril, hold the breath, switch nostrils, breathe out through that first nostril. Hold the breath, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, switch nostrils, breathe out, and so on and so forth, until you can actually feel that you're breathing in similar amounts and with similar ease through both nostrils, which means that your sun and moon channels got evened out in the process. There is a variety of other breathing techniques, but these are kind of the three very, very basic ones that you can start out with, and just start experimenting with bringing your awareness to your breath, not just before and after your yoga practice, but as you're going throughout your day as well. Especially if you have a tendency to get anxious, nervous, or overwhelmed while you're working or going about your day, it is very, very helpful to keep in mind these breathing techniques and practice them whenever you do start feeling that you're becoming short of breath, or once again, overwhelmed, stressed, having a headache, some random pains, so on and so forth. You just want to sit down and bring your awareness into your heart chakra, into your energy center, into your throat chakra, and center yourself on these three aspects of your body to do some controlled, even breathing. So now we've gone over all of the basic principles of the physical movements, the flexibility, becoming aware of your body, straightening out what is bent, bending what is straight, balancing, so on and so forth, as well as breath. Let's round this whole video up with the ending message of synchronization. So what I mean by synchronization is the synchronization of movement and breath as the basis of vinyasa yoga in particular. Because as you might recall from my previous videos, there is different types of yoga. There is also Ashtanga yoga, where the synchronization of breath and movement is not as paid attention to, because if you dive into the history, the creator of the yoga had an illness where he couldn't breathe properly. He had very, very rapid breath that was very shallow at the same time. So his type of yoga does not pay attention to the synchronization aspect, but if you have normal breathing, if you don't struggle with having extremely shallow breaths, it is recommended that you synchronize the movements with the breath. So what is meant by that is that, let's say, on an arm raise, as I've demonstrated in one of the movements in the sun salutation as well, you do breathing out, and then on your breath in, it takes the whole breath to move your arms upwards, and then the whole length of your breath to move your arms back down. And it's the similar principle with the rest of the movement. And it is advised that in the downward dog, you do around 5 breaths to really even yourself out. Once again, synchronize yourself in. And then let's say we want to raise our leg, which we would usually do on a breath in. And then on a breath out, bring it forward. So you can notice that I took the whole of the breath in to raise the leg, the whole of the breath out to bring it through. And then let's say we go into a warrior pose, which would be another breath in and breath out to align the warrior pose and make it more even. And so on and so forth. Then let's say we want to bend backwards, breath in, breath out to deepen the pose. So when I talk about deepening the pose, like with the warrior position just then, you can notice that the breathing out part can be used to actually deepen the position. So in that case, deepening the position would be considered as a separate movement. Whereas if you don't need to deepen the position, you can move straight to the next movement while you're breathing out, which would make the movements more active. So this is kind of where the difference between Hatha and Vinyasa, so the pure Hatha and pure Vinyasa movements, comes in, is that once again, as I've discussed in the previous video, Hatha is slower and actually allows you to go deeper into the movement. So in Hatha yoga, you breathe into the movements as a separate type of movement. So you breathe in to do a certain move, like for example, bring your leg backwards, and then to deepen that movement, you breathe out, and then breathe in again, breathe out again to deepen it even more. And then only after you have brought it to maximum capacity do you move on to the next position. Whereas in Vinyasa, you take only one breath to do a movement and then do a different movement on the breath out, for example. And that pretty much covers everything. So once again, let's summarize what we've just been over. The really, really basics of yoga that you should not forget or go into a yoga practice without keeping in mind. So number 1, keep everything safe, straight, and secure. So especially with such things as knee and elbow joints, try your best and take into consideration all of the other requirements in order to not over-rotate, not overextend them, and really optimize any movements that you do in order to keep these body parts straight. Such things as your back as well, engaging the core in order to keep your back straight at all times. No bends, and if you have back pain, things like that, that means you especially need to pay attention to strengthening your core and always keeping it sucked in order to protect your lower and upper back. Next are the balance points. We always need a minimum of 3 balance points, and we do usually have 3 balance points. So if you're struggling to find balance, that means that you have just lost your awareness of the 3. So bringing your awareness to the 3 balance points at all times in order to then extend your practice and do more flexibility, do stronger, more complicated positions, so on and so forth. Next is alignment, where aside from just keeping the separate body parts straight, you need to also ensure that the body parts align with each other, such as shoulders aligning with your elbows whenever you're doing any kind of hand positions, and covering and increasing the surface area your touch points cover is also extremely helpful, especially if you have any problems with your wrists, with your shoulders, with your legs, with your knees, with your ankles, always make sure that the surface area of the touch points between your body and the floor is increased to increase balance and safety. And the next point is to be gentle with yourself. So don't overextend anything that you're really, really struggling with. So if you're really struggling to, for example, straighten your knees, that means that the backside of your legs is too tense. Therefore, modify the exercises that you do, such as bending your knees, in order to make the exercise safer for yourself and not rip any muscles. Next is the aspect of breathing through the movements. So especially as we're talking about Hatha yoga in particular, as it's, once again, the safest and most common type of yoga to start with, breathe through any difficulties or locks that you have in your body. So if you feel like you have reached a limit, give yourself a bit of time, take 5 or so breaths in order to try to extend it further. And lastly, the breath and movement synchronization, which once again, in some yoga types is not as necessary and key, but is highly advised by pretty much most yoga practices, where the length that you take to breathe in is the length of time that you take to do one movement or to extend a movement. And that is pretty much it. So I hope that this introduction to yoga was also helpful, similar to the previous introduction to yoga, but this time with more of a focus on exercise. And in the next videos, I will be discussing more particular aspects, such as the correct techniques to bend forward, bend backwards, the different twists and turns that you can do in yoga, and once again, how to do all of that safely so that you don't damage yourself. So I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you found this helpful.